So, what about Sebastian Vettel leaving Ferrari at the end of 2020? What's going to happen? What's he going to do? And who's going to replace him? And will Formula One go racing in 2020? Welcome to the Pit Box. All right, a very good afternoon. A little bit later than I expected. I was hoping to get with you at about 4:30, but we are a little bit late. And I'm waiting to get Gary Famate. He's going to come and join us online as well in a short while to discuss all of the shenanigans that have happened in the last couple of hours. May I tell you, I'm pretty sad. I'm sad about the decision that Sebastian Vettel is leaving Ferrari, and there are a couple of reasons. Because I honestly believe that Sebastian was going to be a world champion with Ferrari as long as they gave him the right cars. Now, there are comments that have come out. Well, it's a great news for Ferrari that he's going. He's a has-been. Look at him under pressure. He's running away from Charles Leclerc because Leclerc was quicker than him in one or two races. Everyone's entitled to their opinion, which is fine. I've got no issue with that. We need to look at a couple of things here, which I find this decision rather peculiar. We should be 6 races into the year already. We should have just had the Spanish Grand Prix. But because of the coronavirus and the disease of COVID-19, everything has been in lockdown. And a little later in the program, we're going to talk about whether or not Formula One will actually start this year. So not a wheel has turned this year, and yet Ferrari have decided to let go of Sebastian Vettel. Now just think for a second, hypothetically, had we had the first 6 races and Sebastian Vettel won all 6 races, let's say, hypothetically, would Ferrari be making this decision? I don't think so. So why make this decision just because his contract is up at the end of this year? So we've got to look at the dynamics of how this contract actually works. His contract is up at the end of the year. A couple of weeks ago, there were some rumblings that came out of Italy that said Sebastian Vettel has been offered a new contract at Ferrari with much less pay and a 1-year deal, and he turned them down. Then it went a little bit quiet. And then over the last 48 hours or so, there's been a lot that's come through that has said, well, Sebastian Vettel is going to be leaving Ferrari. So all of a sudden we get the news this morning that they're going to leave. He says it's not about money. Okay, so what is it about? And I want to bring up a quote, and I want us to go through this quote very, very carefully, because I think this is where the problem lies. So let's have a look at that quote that comes up. The team and I, listen to this carefully, realize that there is no longer a common desire to stay together. I will take the time I need to reflect on what really matters. The team and I realize that there is no longer a common desire to stay together. Wow, okay. So let's have a look at that. Sebastian Vettel has always been very, very pro-Ferrari. He's never said a bad thing about them. He's always tried his best. He's basically tried to emulate Michael Schumacher, turn that team into a winning team. They didn't know they were going to come up against the might of Mercedes-Benz and Lewis Hamilton, who's just been driving on fleek over the last 6 seasons. I mean, that's just, unpredictable and unknown. So he's done his absolute best to keep the harmony within the team, to make sure that everybody works together, worked with Maurizio Arrivabene, brought in the likes of Louis Camilleri, who joined as the big boss of Ferrari, and he's tried to keep the harmony. So all of a sudden, when you read that there's no common desire between both sides, I find that extremely troubling. And something has gone exceptionally wrong. He either does not agree with the management approach of what Ferrari are presenting to him at the moment, or he's not happy with, or has not been happy with perhaps the conditions of this contract. If it was a 1-year contract and he was getting paid only $15 million as opposed to his $30 million, he might just sit there and say, well, is it really worth it? Now, speaking of money, with everything that has happened over the last few months with coronavirus, I mean, the economies around the world are going to absolute rubbish. There's no ways that Formula One teams in the future, from now, will be paying exorbitant fees to drivers. Those days are gone. I can tell you that now. The only drivers that can command big salaries at the moment would have been someone like Sebastian Vettel, Lewis Hamilton, and Max Verstappen. That's it. Nobody else can command big salaries, and I do not believe it's justified for the teams to be paying those salaries as well, considering the environment that we are in. Is there desire for Sebastian Vettel? Sebastian Vettel, as we know, is a very private man. He's not on any social media. He keeps himself very much to himself. And perhaps this has been a time for him to decide whether or not he wants to continue racing in Formula One. And if he can't do it with Ferrari on his conditions, then he might just pull the plug. There is talk that he's talking to the likes of McLaren, that he's talking to the likes of Renault, as perhaps moving there. And then, of course, that brings in Carlos Sainz, and that brings in Danny Ricciardo as well. And we'll get to that in a short while. The other thing is, this is a big question as well. Is Vettel a has-been? So many people say, no, he's a has-been. Look at him. He's made so many mistakes. He doesn't know what he's doing. He shouldn't be there. He's too old. Sebastian Vettel is a 4-time world champion. Besides Michael Schumacher and Lewis Hamilton, he's the third most winning, the third most winningest driver in Formula One. He is exceptional. Everyone is entitled to make mistakes. When you've got machinery under you that is not performing to its optimum and you are chasing the carrot all of the time, you are going to make mistakes. We've seen it to everybody when they're in that position. Anybody who discredits somebody like Sebastian Vettel honestly doesn't really understand that much about Formula One or what this young man has done. Don't forget, he's only 32 years old. I will be desperately sad if he does leave Formula One, because I'd still love to see him in Formula One, and I'll support him whatever team he goes to. That's just the way that I feel, and nobody should ever underestimate Sebastian Vettel. Now, let's sit there and think for where he could go before I look at a little bit of a history of Ferrari, what they can and cannot do, who they should sign, who they're probably going to sign. If we look at what now for Sebastian Vettel, he could go and do a straightforward swap, perhaps with Carlos Sainz or with Danny Ricciardo at McLaren or at Renault. Sainz has just signed for McLaren, so it's one of those. Geez, do I stay with McLaren? McLaren are going to be getting the Mercedes power engine. I'm quite happy about that. Or do I go to Ferrari? Ferrari is the team. Regardless, it is always the team everybody wants to race for. So Carlos Sainz is a good opportunity. Also, Ferrari is saving a bundle of money. If they're paying Joe about $6-8 million, they're going to pay Carlos Sainz about $4-5 million. The other one is Vettel does a straight swap with Danny Ricciardo and goes to the Renault team. Now, the problem with Danny Ricciardo is, don't forget, he jumped ship from Red Bull, went to Renault for huge money. I don't see Danny Ricciardo all of a sudden just saying, oh, okay, I'll come and race for Ferrari for $6 million. Unless Ricciardo knows that he's got no chance at Renault of fighting for a title, whereas perhaps with Ferrari, he gets the prestige and perhaps the opportunity of fighting for a title. So that's something that we could think about with Danny Ricciardo and Carlos Sainz. However, you're going to have two limited experienced racing drivers in the Ferrari team. And even though we are living in a world of complete chaos and madness, this could well be the option that Ferrari goes for. Before I discuss any other drivers, I want to go back a little bit and back to 1990, 1989. Ferrari were not doing well in the world of Formula One. They managed to sign Nigel Mansell. Mansell came and raced and then decided no, he was going to America because things weren't coming right. Then they got Alain Prost, and Prost was there for a season and a half. He was a world champion. Mansell wasn't a world champion, but he was looking like he could be a world champion. They signed Prost. He was a world champion. He couldn't do the deal for them, wasn't happy, got fired from Ferrari. After that, there were very lean years for Ferrari. They had Jean Alesi. Then they had, I'm trying to think of, not Alex Caffey, Ivan Capelli, Nicola Larini, and then Gerhard Berger. And then you thought, well, maybe Alesi and Berger could do something. Berger came with the experience. Alesi had all of this charm and unbelievable speed. It never materialized into anything. And from then onwards, this is where you have to look at things. They signed Michael Schumacher, a 2 times world champion. Schumacher came and turned Ferrari around. After Michael Schumacher, they signed a guy called Kimi Räikkönen, who in his own right should have won championships with McLaren had the McLaren been reliable. He went on to win a championship for Ferrari. After Räikkönen, they signed Alonso. After Alonso, they signed Vettel. World champions, experienced racing drivers. It does make sense for Ferrari to have 2 inexperienced drivers in their pool. Granted, Charles Leclerc seems to be a fantastic racing driver, but he got undone by Max Verstappen a couple of times last season. He still got to prove himself. Yes, he had 2 fantastic victories with an engine that supposedly was much quicker than everybody else. As soon as they turned that engine down, Charles Leclerc wasn't anywhere. So what is Ferrari trying to do? To have Charles Leclerc, wonderful, and then what? Sign Carlos Sainz, Danny Ricciardo. Sainz hasn't won a Grand Prix. Ricciardo's won a few, but none of them have really pushed to go and win a world championship. So then who else do you look at? And I'm going to get to the main one in a short while. Who else do you look at? Mick Schumacher, Antonio Giovinazzi, Mika Hülkenberg, George Russell could be a good bet. But all of a sudden you got 2 completely inexperienced drivers. It's not the way Ferrari has worked since 1995. Why would they change all of a sudden 25 years later? Maybe the COVID virus, maybe Corona, maybe a completely different look at strategy. It hasn't worked in the past for them by having 2 inexperienced drivers. Why do they think it's going to work now? That is what I am concerned about the most. Now I want to look at 2 drivers. One of them is Max Verstappen. Max Verstappen has pledged his support to Red Bull and with Honda, and they're paying him oodles and oodles of money, and his contract is very, very tight, and it looks like he's going to stay there. But the 2 things. He's spoken very negatively about Ferrari, and Ferrari will forgive him for that. The other thing is, Ferrari has been in Formula One since day dot. And by the way, tomorrow, the 13th of May, is 70 years since the first ever Grand Prix at Silverstone. They are there for the long haul. The way that everything else is changing in the world, is Honda looking now at going more electric, and are they going to give up on their Formula One side of the business? We don't know. It's a lot to think about. But if somebody throws the carrot at Max Verstappen and says, come to Ferrari, you've got to believe it's there. If they are now all of a sudden don't have to pay the 40 million rand wage bill to Sebastian Vettel, Ferrari's got the money to sit there and lure them in that kind of. That's this as yet. And then the other one, Lewis Hamilton. Hamilton's contract comes up at the end of this year. He's had an unbelievable run with Mercedes-Benz. I mean, he will become the most winningest driver, and he might well go on to beat all of Michael Schumacher's 7 world championships. It's very, very achievable for someone like Lewis Hamilton. But Mercedes are also in a predicament now, because with everything that's gone on in the world, they're going to get big pressure from their shareholders. Are we spending too much money on Formula One? Cutbacks over here. What are they going to do, and perhaps even withdraw from the sport and become just a engine supplier in the future? So if Lewis all of a sudden understands and realizes that Mercedes is not going to be the same Mercedes from 2022, why not go to Ferrari? Ferrari's the only one who's got the money that can pay him the kind of wage that he, number one, will demand, and number two, that he deserves. So Lewis Hamilton, and I've got a picture of Lewis in a red overall. Fritz, let's throw that up on the screen. I think it would be quite funny to see what Lewis would look like in a red Ferrari overall. So just having a look at some of the people, lots of people coming in. What about Danny Ricciardo? There we go. Imagine Lewis in red. I think he would look fantastic. Lots of people. Lewis to Ferrari, Vettel to Clerk. Why has no one mentioned Nico Hulkenberg? I've mentioned Nico Hulkenberg, and I'll go back to that in a couple of minutes from now as well. Thanks, Fritz. We can take that picture away. So don't discount Lewis Hamilton joining Ferrari. It does make sense if you look at how the history of Ferrari has gone from when they signed Michael Schumacher, a world champion, a potential world champion, a world champion, a world champion. Charles Leclerc might have a contract until the end of 2024, but he's still very inexperienced. And to have two young kids in a Formula One team of the caliber of Ferrari is incredibly, incredibly risky for an organization like Ferrari, in my opinion. So others that we can look at, of course, Nico Hulkenberg. Maybe they throw him a one-year deal and say, Nico, come over here and be Charles's I don't know, just second player. Antonio Giovinazzi, I do not believe, has got the caliber to be in Ferrari. And why would he go there for a one-year deal? That means his career is over straight after that. It does perhaps open up a seat at Alfa Romeo, and then, of course, gives an opportunity for someone like Mick Schumacher or Schwartzman to get into the Alfa Romeo, just to try and blend these guys in. The idea of two inexperienced drivers at Ferrari does not work, in my opinion. I would be very surprised if they do that. I know that they're putting their eggs in a basket with Charles Leclerc, but Leclerc still, I think, would have needed at least one more season racing with someone like Sebastian Vettel to really hone his skills. Just as we saw with Felipe Massa racing with the likes of Michael Schumacher, and then racing with Kimi Räikkönen and being so close. Had he not had those years of experience with that Massa, with those caliber of drivers, he wouldn't have managed to get to the levels that he was, if you look back on Massa's career. So taking nothing away from Charles Leclerc, he's a fantastic driver and a great young kid, but I don't know if he's wise enough at this stage to be the lead in Ferrari. Just go back and look at what happened with Jean Alesi back in 1991. Maybe one of the most talented drivers the world has ever seen, managed to win one race in his career. Okay, what about Aston Martin? Krista says, hey, what about Aston Martin? Good call as well. Vettel could look at something like Aston Martin. Of course, they're going to get Mercedes power as well. But Perez is entrenched there. And you've got Lance Stroll, whose dad owns the organization. You're not gonna unseat him, that's for sure. But if you look at what's happened with Aston Martin and also this tie-up with Mercedes-Benz, and Mercedes-Benz, I don't know, saying that they might leave the sport, and it's all might. There's no reason why Lawrence Stroll doesn't buy Mercedes and has Aston Martin, and he has an A and a B team similar to Red Bull and AlphaTauri. So there's lots of things that could happen. I'm just going through some other things that have mentioned. Hulkenberg, maybe a change would be good. Danny would be good. Anybody will be good, but please just understand my way of logic and thinking about this, that two young drivers within the Ferrari organization is not the ideal situation for them. They might go and do it. Personally, I don't think it's an ideal situation. There are only two drivers out there, in my opinion, that could take on the likes of Lewis Hamilton. Max Verstappen and Sebastian Vettel. That's how I see it. Okay, and Vettel now is not in Ferrari. Hopefully he's not lost to the sport. Okay, please post your comments, and of course I'll keep going with all of those during the course of the day, and I'll reply to them as well. The final thing that I've got to do, because I have to go and do a radio interview about the whole Sebastian story, so I want to talk a little bit about, will Formula One go racing in 2020? I read a really good piece with the medical professor of Formula One, Geraint, what's his name? I keep on getting it wrong. I'll get it right now. Give me a second. Salant. Okay, Geraint Salant. And basically the way that he says, if Formula One goes racing, and they, believe me, they are working furiously to try and get this, there are going to be roughly 2,000 people around the track for a Formula One race. That's excluding all spectators. This is very limited press, TV crews, the Formula One crews, all of the personnel that run it, the drivers, the mechanics, etc. It's roughly about 2,000 people. And what he suggests is that everybody will be within a bubble, okay? And that will be your group of people. So you're basically going to walk around in a bubble. And if somebody contracts the disease, then they can immediately go within that bubble and find out and then go and test. They apparently have got a test that can give a result within 90 minutes, which is extraordinary, okay? They're saying that if they go to Austria in July, they would have to have 2 days of quarantine. Everybody would be tested. Everybody would be in these different hubs. And then, of course, they would go to the circuit. And from there, they would go and race. Now, I am going to dedicate a whole episode to how Formula One can race and if it will race. But I am going to leave with this very, very if, unfortunately. If they go to Austria, okay, and they're there, and they start racing, and all of a sudden one person gets the virus, you've got to believe that everyone in the world will say, shut down. So having a championship in 2020 is going to be very, very difficult for Formula One. Every sport in the world is losing millions and millions of dollars every single day because of coronavirus and COVID-19. But there's nothing anybody else can do about it. The final point that I want to make is there's this rumor of back-to-back races in Austria, back-to-back races in Silverstone. Can that constitute a championship? Would we have to rewrite the sporting regulations? What happens if Mercedes just go out and dominate in Austria and then win both races? And it's a sort of unfair advantage to everybody else. And then Ferrari go to Silverstone and dominate those two races. It's not fair. There's a lot of ifs and buts and questions that have to be answered by the Formula One authorities, and hopefully we'll get some clarification on that. But they are looking very seriously at going racing from Austria and having some plan in action of how everybody moves around from place to place, hub to hub, country to country, where they stay and how they do it. It's going to cost a fortune, but it could well be the model that works for the rest of the world to have a look at as well. So, Sebastian Vettel is out at Ferrari at the end of the year. Who will replace him? Lewis Hamilton. I hope. I think. Danny Ricciardo, Carlos Sainz, it could be a whole host of any other drivers. But if I look at the way that Ferrari has worked over the last 25 years, I say Lewis Hamilton. Anyway, we'll find out soon enough. They usually only do their announcements round about Monza, so we've still got about 5 months to wait. We'll find out what Sebastian Vettel is going to be doing as well. Listen, thanks for joining me on the Pit Box, and I will catch up with you very, very soon. I will bring you all of the updates in Formula One, and tomorrow again, I'll be continuing with my new series of F1 Sasha brings you the F1 files as I look at every day in the history of Formula One. Keep the comments coming in. Please subscribe to the channel. Please share with everybody. And until next time, take care. Ciao, ciao.